The biggest area for us at the minute is within video. It's within shorter form video, published across all social platforms. Snapchat, YouTube Shorts, which is blowing up and is only going to blow up further as they seek to to sort of improve the monetization tools available to publishers on there.
Welcome to Media Voices, everybody. We take a semi-serious look at all the news from the media world over the past week. I'm Chris Sutcliffe.
I'm Esther Thorpe.
And I'm Peter Houston.
And that clip you heard at the start was from my interview with Josh Nino, who is founder and CEO of Dexerto, an esports, gaming and influencer-focused publication. We spoke about how Dexerto went about carving a foothold in a competitive market that is often unfriendly to newcomers, where an esports-focused publication looks to grow revenue and audience, and whether those opportunities are universal for all digital publications, and what he thinks is the future of sports and esports-related communities online. But before that, Peter, you actually have some publication news of your own.
Yeah. After years of banging on about magazines, I'm actually launching a magazine. I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. Joanna, my publishing partner and life partner, was the editor for Word on the Street in the summer last year, which was a day, a magazine in a day that was done from the Mag Street conference. And she was just so buzzing on it, just both the process and the end result. And we both got talking and thought, okay, let's do this. So now we're deep in the planning stages of the Grub Street Journal. We'll explain more about that later, which is a quarterly magazine for people who make magazines. And
are you going to do it in a day?
No. It will be a slow process. It's about, it's not just for people that make magazines, but about people that make magazines. There's loads of stuff. We do stuff about magazines and publishing. There's all sorts of, podcasts, journalism.co.uk, all sorts of stuff about magazines. It's excellent. But we and they are so focused on Media Voices, and they are so focused on the business models that we don't always talk about the people. So we're going to talk more about people. And we're going to have a laugh with it as well. I mean, you've met me. I don't think
you could do this without it being a laugh.
So we're theming it the Don Quixote issue, and the cover story is what kind of idiots still make magazines.
If people are interested, where can they find that?
The Grub Street Journal is on grubstreetjournal.com, and they can register for updates on that. Although the counter said 65 days for like 4 days, so I don't know what's going on. Or they can go to my Magazine Diaries newsletter. You can find a link to that in the Media Voices website. And because one of the things, again, maybe me, I'm going to try and document the process of this. What's the process, and what's the feels in actually launching a print magazine in 2023.
I'm looking forward to seeing the slow, just like complete degradation of you over the course of the time up to publication, and just like you at the start in a full suit going like, absolutely, we secured funding. And then like 2 days before the deadline, just like hair wild. It's like stained t-shirt.
Tartan pajamas.
We have secured funding. It's my friggin' bank account.
That leads neatly onto our first topic, because what if that counter down to sort of launch day has decided to stick on 65 days because the AI that powers it has gone, there's no way he's going to do it by then. So Esther,
that's terrifyingly real. That could have happened. Oh,
well, Esther, what does that lead us on to? What's our main story for the week?
I can't talk that as a segue to end all segues. The top story we're going to discuss this week is, so last week it was fairly widely reported that tech news site CNET had been quietly publishing articles generated by an AI engine and sort of labeling them as published by CNET Money staff. They've since relabeled that and have actually put a slightly clearer disclaimer at the top. But there's a piece from John Christian on futurism, which goes through the articles that they cited as being like great examples of ones that this AI had written. And it's like, it sounds reasonable and it looks reasonable to somebody who's not financially literate, but it's basically full of like factual errors. It's inaccurate. Some of the stuff that some of the formulas and things that the AI was suggesting was just plain wrong. And so, John Christian sort of pointed out some basic errors on financial advice pieces being published, including things like some really basic errors and things like explainers about compound interest, how loans work, stuff that I looked at and I was like, I'm not especially, I'm not a financial expert by any means, but even I can tell that's a little bit off.
A loan is free money. You never have to pay it back.
It's just raised all these questions again about, I think sort of the big question is like, if this is a test that was in the early stages, this should be when editorial is at its most vigilant about this sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And this has just completely passed them by.
It's an interesting one, wasn't it? And the timing of it is perfect, because this has been the week where everybody has been talking about AI in terms of what that's going to do to power media companies, financial institutions, and even sort of entertainment over the next couple of years. ChatGPT-3 has been the focus of a lot of this just because it has become much more widely available. But I love that first quote that you've picked out here, which is the problem. It's kind of a moron, which is interesting because it's both a very human understanding of what the AI has done, but it's not necessarily representative of why the AI has fallen down. And I wonder to what extent we're in the midst of this transition from automation to creation, and we're seeing kind of that falling down.
Well, I think human beings are just properly conflicted over this, because, that headline is brilliant, or it's a subhead, whatever, that it's calling it a moron. I think you're right. It's not a moron. The people using it or managing it are morons.
Or just deploying it and then leaving it to its own devices.
Particular context. But I think we've got this expectation that machines, this weird sci-fi expectations that machines are smarter than we are. Mm-hmm. And yeah, they're maybe sometimes smarter than we are, but the real point is they're faster and cheaper than we are.
What's really interesting?
A lot of publishers are slipping into that kind of. That's the way they're trying to use it.
So I just reread The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein. And in that, he's talking about, it's one of the first early examples in fiction of a truly sapient AI called Mikey. And even that, this is written like in the 60s, I think. And he's talking about, it can do that kind of the maths very well. But in terms of understanding stuff like humor and how you actually sort of like formulate a sense of what it means to be cheeky, it can't necessarily do that. And it's kind of those limitations which we're running into when we're talking about using AI in journalism and creation.
It doesn't do nuance, right? Mm-hmm. That's the point.
But I think the problem with this is that this isn't nuance or creativity. This is basic factual mathematics of how to calculate like interest and loans. And it's not that it's sort of, failed to create anything emotive or whatever, or it's failed to read emotion. This is basic factual errors that are creeping in and they're not being caught by the humans that should be catching them.
But they said, before the mistakes were caught, they said that everything was being reviewed and fact-checked and edited by human beings, which makes you think, what's the process?
Well, how good are the human beings in this in this equation?
Yeah. But this isn't a new. Well, the technology isn't new, is it? And like Chris, you said you've been writing about this for a long time.
It has been 5 or 6 years since I've been talking about publications using AI in the newsroom, and it's always been for rote stuff, pulling in, it's been less about creation and writing articles and more about helping journalists do their job as an AI tool to pull in financial information and kind of publish it in a very structured and staid way. But I do feel like just this last week, I've been taking crazy pills because it's like people have forgotten that we've been doing that for half a decade at this point. And everybody's been like, oh my God, have you seen this new tool?
How many articles have you read that had the headline, "Is a robot's coming for your job"?
Yeah,
forever.
I was writing them 5-6 years ago.
Okay, and I think that the article, and we'll put this in the show notes, the conclusion of this article absolutely hitting the nail on the head about why this is now such an issue. And John Christian says that it's not just AI that's the issue here. It's that AI is maturing at a moment when the journalism industry has been hollowed out by a decades-long race to the bottom. And he says that it's a perfect storm for media bosses eager to cut funding for human writers. And that's where you wonder, you look at these CNET things and you say, is this that they have been fact-checked by, like a very junior copywriter and not a financial expert? Because that's the sort of person that would have picked up these mistakes. Mm-hmm. And is this just going to be used as an excuse to cut expertise?
Well, there's a slight corollary to that as well. I was going back through Neiman Lab predictions for this year, and there's one from Janet Haven, who's the executive director of Data and Society, and she said it's not going to be the publications, the legitimate publications like CNET, The Guardian, all these guys who use this and use it poorly. It will be the people who use it nefariously. So she said, we will see ChatGPT and tools like it used in adversarial ways that are intended to undermine trust in information environments, pushing people away from public discourse to increasingly homogenous communities. Effectively, it's going to be those other platforms, the publications that thrive on just having attention, that are just going to use this to pump out stories that contain deliberate misinformation and disinformation.
I wrote a little thing for the International Magazine Centre about this, talking not about text, talking about images. And there's two worrying things. One is that kind of benign laziness, and the other one is that malicious kind of setting out to create, whether it's deep fakes or whether it's even just dog whistle type images that are. But that malicious intent is kind of scary.
Mm-hmm. In a way, it's fun that we are in our lifetime potentially facing Skynet. But the downside of that is that we are potentially facing Skynet. I don't know which one of you it was put this comparison with self-driving cars in the notes.
It was in the article.
Was it?
Very good piece.
Yeah. Researchers found that human safety drivers tasked with sitting behind the wheel of an autonomous vehicle to take over if it malfunctions tend to quickly lose focus when they don't have to actively work the controls. The same dynamic may be at play when an editor is put in charge of approving a deluge of AI-generated explainers in the face of endless synthetic writing. Maybe it makes sense that human editors start to go on autopilot themselves.
That's a really scary point. That idea that if you think you can trust the tech, then you don't pay attention the same way.
It's, appropriately named. It's WALL-E. It's the fact that humans can just kind of go on autopilot and be piloted around the space station and not have to pay attention because they trust the AI that much.
This is a huge trust issue for publishers as well, because once we will get all sorts of sites, all sorts of people using these tools to produce all sorts of things, but people will then turn to publishers expecting to be able to trust what they're producing, and if they're also not checking what's coming out of this stuff, it's hugely problematic.
I think the transparency issue again. I mean, we've talked about transparency in relation to trust anyway. Mm-hmm. Show your workings, what's your process, who's doing what. It's the same thing for this. I think maybe we're seeing. I actually haven't followed this story particularly closely in terms of where it started, but I get the sense that CNET wasn't shouting about it before it started to go wrong. And so that transparency issue is maybe playing into this. I don't know. So I find that I'm so conflicted by this. I really am. I think any organization that can automate and cleverly automate really, really boring volume-based tasks like annual reports or the weather or house prices or junior sports or all of those things that have just got huge amounts of data but very structured. I think that is absolutely makes sense to do that. But where there's this solutions aspect, which sounds like, from what Esther's saying with the financial stuff, it sounds like there's a solutions aspect to some of this, John.
Well, so Casey Newton wrote a piece for The Verge about this. He said that what CNET was doing, it was essentially a monetization thing where they wanted to publish large volumes of really cheaply produced text to get to the top of the search results in a bid to capture what he calls the monetizable eyeballs of the financially curious. Now, they're not the only publisher who are incentivized by that sort of thing.
Oh, no, they just found a way to do it cheaper.
That's what Reach does, except it uses humans.
For now.
The interesting thing there is I read a couple of things this week that are basically saying, if you use AI to completely generate an article from start, it's actually going to negatively impact your SEO. And a couple of people have pitched me articles about how you actually navigate around that. It's, remains to be seen how likely and possible it is to detect this kind of stuff in the long term. But that's a very cynical.
Okay, but let's get to the root of that one. If you're writing just for SEO, holy crap. I'm holding my hand up. I have done that. Whether it's content marketing or whether it's just to get people to a website, I've done it. But if that's the only thing you do, then there's issues with that.
Reach is actually quite a good example here, because you could say that this is a perfect example for the AI to write the SEO, the clickbaity stuff. And then you can free up your reporters to do local reporting. But that, we all know that absolutely won't happen. And what happens is that the AI will write the stuff and the reporters will get cut and cut and cut and cut and cut.
Or they'll go into kind of a pre-run AI generated article and maybe just add a little bit of local flavor.
Some of those articles look like they've been written by robots anyway.
It's interesting. I was talking on a panel about this earlier this week. I think this is an opportunity for smart publishers to use it as a point of differentiation and kind of say, well, look, yeah, absolutely. We are aware that AI is a tool and we might deploy it when it's appropriate, but here is human analysis, and potentially you can have a chat, in the same way that we're bringing audiences in the newsroom now. Maybe, we open a line so you can talk directly to the human author behind this.
We could almost do with doing a big, deep dive report and podcast documentary into this topic, couldn't we?
Mm-hmm.
We should do that. Maybe March sometime.
And moving on now to news in briefs, and there is a big old update on Elon Musk's Twitter this week.
You called it news in briefs, and it cracks me up every time you say that. I've just got this image of someone stood in a jockey short Y front.
I'm sat.
That's what we need to do for merch.
What? Media Voices
Media
knickers.
Voices briefs.
Yeah, news and briefs.
Okay,
I love it.
Which of us is going to model them for the page?
Nobody wants to see me in that at the moment.
Absolutely. We must know someone that actually would look good in a pair of briefs. If you want to model our briefs, email us.
Okay, at what point
want to buy our briefs, email us.
Oh God, I don't want to see us on like the Press Gazette for like popular media podcast shamed for soliciting knicker photos from audience. Back to the story. So this big update on what's going on at Musk's Twitter. Obviously, it's been long enough now that people can start digging into the circumstances. And there's a pre-post-mortem in The Verge about the realities of the takeover, which is fascinating to hear how a lot of people internally went, yay, Musk, and then immediately got sacked, to the Guardian article that we're going to link in the story, which demonstrates the financial straits in which the new Twitter's found itself. So it's been a 40% year-on-year revenue drop. Most major advertisers are still pulling spend.
I read something in Axios last week that they'd actually increased all their bookings for revenue for 2023.
So I think that might be for very, very low value stuff. They've also done some incredibly generous matching of ad spend. So it's less about them being in a good financial position and more about them trying to mask the fact that they're not. But apart from that, it's all problem, all bad for Mr. Musk. And the rollout of the new For You algorithmic feed has also pissed off some users, including me, for the simple reason that A, it's crap, and B, almost every other social platform that you can name has tried exactly this and then had to walk it back. So most recently, Instagram had to basically do a very public apology and say, actually, we're rolling back the amount of algorithmically generated recommendations that are going to be in your feed. So all we need really is a Kardashian to come onto Twitter and say, Musk
said that. I think yesterday somebody was complaining about it, and he responded being like, "Oh yeah, that was an error. Like, we're rolling it back this week." It's just really hard to keep up with what he's talking about though, because he was threatening to like not pull the plug on review like 2 hours before he pulled the plug on it. Who knows?
I have to say that I didn't actually notice that much of a difference, to be honest, because it was crap before. And my feed these days is just full of right wing head cases.
Anyway.
I've definitely consciously been spending more time on LinkedIn.
Gross.
Great.
I was going to say it's its own weird space, but those posts with the friggin' emoji bullet points in them, holy crap.
Yeah.
Keep it under 150 words, people.
What about 280 characters? That sounds about right for that.
Yeah, there you go. Nice one. So this week in the newsletter, so there was this article, an interview, and it's a really good interview actually in the Press Gazette with Richard Campbell, who's the MD of News at Future. He runs the Week in a Week Junior. And their headline on this interview was, "We're US first." And this is something that Richard Campbell said. And everyone else like, oh, or at least everyone with any memory of Future's recent past, I think. And I said in the newsletter that the quote made me queasy, and he almost immediately got a DM, and actually on Twitter, saying, "I worry that your last line," which because it was the last line in my report, my little blurb, might be a little prophetic. And then threatening to write a history of UK publishers' misadventures in the US. And the serious point they made was that there's the difference between the UK and the US. And they said, this person said in the US, it was all about confidence and swagger and this belief in your own products. It's kind of go big or go home. It is a US sort of mantra. And that's utterly foreign to us in the UK. I think we're much more, I don't know, leaning back, thinking, being a bit more defensive.
I think in general, it's the fact that they are such an established UK publication, and they've got such an established UK audience. And the fact that when the Week Junior launched, everybody was like, "Yeah, this isn't going to work," and it was in the UK, it worked. And they've done really, really well with the US launches. But is this a sign that they're kind of looking to tie together those parts of the business more? In which case,
they've just closed an office in Atlanta.
I know.
It's just a weird. I don't know. It's a great interview, and it talks about the differences between the two markets, and it talks about the strengths. And yeah, the American market is 250 million people or whatever it is, and the British market is 70 million people max. So yeah, I get that, the opportunities now, but that framing, rather than saying the US is a major opportunity for us, it's US first. If I was sat in some of these offices and someone said that, I'd be like, what? I mean, knocking my pan in for 20 years for this business, and what, now we're all going to friggin' Disneyland? What?
Heading over to the new world.
Yeah, I don't know. So the framing on it, I just found really weird.
Peter, can we conclude then that Grub Street Journal will be going US first?
Absolutely not.
With absolutely no connection to briefs or burlesque at all, Axios Pro generated $2 million last year, apparently, with more than 3,000 paid subscribers. So Axios launched its subscription business actually literally just 12 months ago. So that's doing really well.
That's not bad.
They charge $599 for an annual subscription to one pro newsletter. They've got a number across different verticals. They've got like healthcare, tech, medicine, like all sorts of things. I think they've got a media vertical as well, actually. Or you can subscribe to all of them for about $2,500. One part that did make me laugh with this piece is that so DigiDay's Kaylee Barber reported that at the 1 year mark, they say their retention rate is 100%. But they offer annual subscriptions, so the first of those actually won't have expired yet.
That's so smart.
Which she did point out. So we'll see how that goes over the next few months. But they are actually expecting to generate at least 20% more this year based on the renewals they've already sold and increases to subscription packages. Now, obviously with Axios Pro, that's the sort of thing that you can get a company subscription to, you can expense it. I mean, generally, this was a very obvious market for them to go into. I'm not surprised they've done as well as they have.
This week, I spoke with Josh Nino, who is CEO and co-founder of Dexerto. We spoke about what it means to be a gaming-focused publication when many gaming communities now cluster around platforms like Twitch and Discord, how not to alienate new readers. This is the first and probably only time I'll get to talk about Korean backdashing and footsies on Media Voices, and where he sees growth for digital publications. I can see the two of your faces. But to begin with, I asked him how Dexerto came to exist in the first place.
Did we find out in the interview what Korean backdashing and footsies are?
Nope.
Well, you've got to have to explain that. You can't leave that hanging.
Nope.
I'm a former professional gamer. I played for Dignitas, about 17, 18. So you're talking maybe 15 odd years ago, maybe a little bit more and whatnot. And so I've been pretty much grown up in competitive video gaming or esports as we now know it. And we actually found Dexerto primarily to bring a sports style, not sports overall, but sports style coverage to esports. And that quickly evolved into an understanding that actually, people follow sport. We all sort of follow sport because of the people, because of sports stars, because of the stories behind the sports stars, right? That's what enriches the rivalries, it enriches the wins, the losses, and whatnot. It's a eternal story. And obviously that applies to anything in which, it requires competition. You want to learn more about the winners and the losers. So we discovered our own tone. We established our own tone for that, a tone that certainly wasn't adopted anywhere else in gaming. Obviously, esports is ultimately a section of video gaming, right? And actually, from esports, as important as esports is, and as cool as it is with respect to this emerging world of digital sports, it was actually sort of, let's call it, Dexerto's real inroads that allowed us to truly catapult in gaming and take meaningful market share in the publishing world of gaming from a news standpoint was influencers. We totally trailblazed influencers. I call it evolutionary because would people have gone on to cover influencers at some point in time? Yes, of course they would, because they are, figures with large amounts of followings. But we were the first. Took a bold leap. There was a natural overlap between personalities and players competing in esports. So it just made trailblazing influencers just a total next step, right? And that was really, where we made our mark, put our flag on the map, and gave us credibility when going in to cover gaming as a whole. Because at the end of the day, you're not covering gaming in some respect, then you're missing out on a huge chunk of your audience, rather. And the trick is really to create that connection between your origin point, your credentials, your influencers, your esports, and sort of, fold gaming into that, which represents the much vaster size or proportion of the market, right? And everyone is a gamer these days anyway. So
absolutely, yeah. See, there's so much there that we can unpack. I do want to quickly pick up on something you said, which is about focusing on the individuals and really taking that sports-led approach to kind of esports and gaming coverage. To what extent are influencers still central to gaming coverage?
On one hand, you could say that esports is sort of this niche that is growing. There is a big enough market in the niche of esports, but arguably influencers have overtaken it. And to give you an example, KSI, he's not in esports, but he came from FIFA. So let's use an example like Ninja. He was a former Halo Pro. He then blew up at one point to be called, the biggest gamer or the most popular gamer in the world, right? But I don't think it's true to say that influencers sort of overtake esports. Influencers is very much of a center of this emerging sort of world of, and it's much established now, of digital celebrity, right? And, you have so much overlap. You have overlap with influencer of a center. You put influencer of a center of something, then you have overlaps with gaming, fashion, food, music, tech, because the influencer is everywhere. Influencers really are sort of disrupting advertising, and that is why they're so popular, right? Because they are, becoming, let's call it, the focal point of which brands use for endorsements to drive sales, to drive interest and whatnot. And ultimately commoditization is the only way that market grows. So they are sort of the focal point of this, and so many areas overlap with it. But look, you go back to something like an esports or even like a gaming, like streaming and gamers and whatnot. They are, central because I guess they give let's call it another, or rather they give an icon or a hero dimension to the community. It's no longer just people talking, sharing, and debating their favorite games, their favorite, what's looking forward to in terms of new releases and what are their favorite consoles. There are now authority figures in this space that which they can look up to, who sort of, they watch more than they play the games themselves and whatnot. So it's a real rich dimension, where they sort of, the game is no longer just about playing. It's also about experiencing it through the eyes of someone that they respect and love and adore and follow,
So you've preempted a couple of my questions there around sort of community and how you grow that. But you also mentioned disruption. And obviously Dexerto's come in and to what was quite an established space. There were some big gaming brands that had existed for, decades at this point and sort of really found a place within that. So what was the positioning of Dexerto to begin with and how has that shifted?
Definitely from esports. It started esports, we were and remain the biggest esports news platform. But esports is now one vertical within our sort of, we have gaming, we have esports, we have influencer entertainment, we have TV movies, we have tech and whatnot. We've dabbled, in a number of different areas as well. But esports was the original credential, and then that became influencer entertainment, right? So people who, let's call it Mr. Beast, your Dr. Disrespects, your Ninjas, your Timber Tatmans and whatnot, Pokemans, Ramarams. It's people who are sort of entertaining people en masse on social media. So that was, I guess, because there's so much overlap between those people in gaming, because all of them are playing video games all the time.
Yeah.
Or at least for a large part of the time, I've been playing video games and whatnot. PewDiePie, this gave us sort of a really unique tone of voice and authority when it came to our view into gaming, because this is our stake in the ground. This is why we serve a specific need around what let's call it fans and users want when it comes to gaming. They don't just want a review of a game that you would expect from a legacy publisher like an IGN or a GameSpot. They also want to know what people are talking about the game. And, driving that conversation is what Dexerto has done really well. We've driven people's opinions to a new level on social media, on website, where it now becomes, it has its own real sort of, prolonged sort of story that you have to follow through time and whatnot. And yeah, I would say that this sort of encouraging and developing of conversations and things that people are passionate about within these games, within these franchises and whatnot, is what our speciality was. Of course, we do a lot of the bread and butter stuff within gaming that you would expect a lot of game publishers will do as well. But that is an obvious low-hanging fruit thing to do, especially when you have sort of authority that we developed elsewhere. It just makes it low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, certainly. And I think you're totally right about sort of facilitating those conversations. I saw there was a post on there earlier about the Suicide Squad's games as a service integration, which people were kind of up in arms about a little bit. So yeah, fascinating to see how you're sort of integrating with conversations online. Gaming communities are increasingly clustered around platforms. So we've seen Discord making a big play over the last couple of years. We've seen specific subreddits per game. So how are you speaking to gamers who, their primary destination for community might lie elsewhere?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's something that as a forum before Dexerto, so it was incorporated as a business, it was more of a hobbyist platform. And we were a forum. We're a place where Call of Duty players could go and, just chat with like-minded people, go and find games together, find teams together and whatnot. And what happened? Social media happened. Twitter happened, Reddit happened. And this is where the community sort of drifted to. They no longer use sort of independent forums. They use social media because you can be much part of a bigger conversation. Your voice can be amplified much further, or you can, at the very least, you feel that it's getting amplified much further, right? And you can also interact with these heroes and icons in there as well. So there was a massive shift. There was a disruption in the space. And, user acquisition, let's call it, changed not just for us. It was changing for everyone, Legacy publishers, not many, maybe like an IGN again. I think they still command a great sort of direct level of interest into their platform. They function, compared to a lot of websites, much more as a studio, in all honesty, a TV studio, where the publishing model works. It's like logging onto a BBC or a CNN, right? The publishing that goes into there is quite sophisticated. So I think there is still real fan equity in legacy publishers, not many, and it is eroding by and large why? And why is that to the benefit of people like Dexerto and others? Because user acquisition is now coming through social, it's coming through Google. People are typing specifically what they're looking for, and then they're going through side doors, be it through search, be it through social, be it through Reddits and whatnot. They're going through side doors, they're checking out what they want, and then they go back to those social media platforms or Reddits and have the conversation there. So in essence, what we're talking about will find its way, assuming that it's good content, it's what people want to read. And obviously the technical side, let's call it the business side, making sure that we are ranking highly across, search and whatnot, have good social platforms, have good overall quantitative and qualitative authority. Then our content, news, entertainment videos will find its way onto these social platforms of these Reddits, and they will be discussed on those platforms. But you cannot go in and try to take our audience permanently away from there. We have to accept what it is. There's a lot of pros to it, by the way. And accept that side door traffic is more and more becoming the highest proportion of traffic for everyone, to be honest.
I was going to say, I would not be surprised if Media Voices listeners who don't necessarily engage with gaming or with kind of gaming communities, gaming in a lot of ways did preempt a lot of what we're seeing other publications do, particularly around trying to build communities elsewhere. So when you're looking at a platform like Twitch, which obviously has, huge audiences on there, but tends to be clustered around individuals, or even some games, you have people who are influencer agnostic, but do follow games. How do you feel, Twitch is affecting your strategy? Are you thinking about having a brand presence across there more regularly? What's sort of the strategy there?
So, I'll start with Twitch. I mean, Twitch has largely helped to grow the market. And a lot of publishers are stepping into that because it gives a medium for which, influencers and gamers, streamers, everything, VOD creators on YouTube, they're all creating content which conversation can then manifest around, right? So it's growing the market in that regard. In terms of our own presence and whatnot, the biggest area for us at the minute is within video. It's within shorter form video, published across all social platforms, Snapchat, YouTube Shorts, which is blowing up and is only going to blow up further as they seek to sort of improve the monetization tools available to publishers on there and whatnot. And obviously YouTube itself, let's call it legacy YouTube proper is already huge and whatnot. It's dominant. So that's the area for us. Having a presence on something like live streaming and whatnot, while there is definitely a selective case-by-case basis that we already do it in, a lot of it when it's come to commercial stuff, partnerships, campaigns, the level of production and to sustain level of production, not just cost, but time required to sustain that programming is much more expensive and time consuming than doing shorts programming that lives on Snapchat or TikTok and whatnot, right? So, as a business, especially, in times where there may be economic downturn, you can't have a look and say, where are we successful? Where is revenue growing? And you look immediately towards places where we're having a lot of growth in users, a lot of growth in revenue. And that just happens to be social video. And with Twitch streaming and whatnot, that is riskier and it requires a lot more programming. And it's much harder to keep an audience compelled over time as well. And as much as we do long form video, I wouldn't necessarily call it programming. Whereas on a short form basis, it absolutely is short form programming, right? So, I would say that in the long term, it's a stepping stone towards that. In the short term, it's a very, very good compromise to not having a presence on live stream. Not to say that it even is a compromise, right? It's its own thing. But of course, having a live stream presence on Twitch comes with its own level of, of benefits, of credibility. Do you need to be there? No. Is it very good to be there? Absolutely, yes.
So I think you're completely right. In fact, some of the live streaming, the best marketing that we've seen on live streaming has required huge marketing budgets. So there was a Ferrari one we just covered for the drum, which was, that took a huge amount of prep, and it was something that an individual publication couldn't necessarily do without sponsorship. For the listeners who don't necessarily know what short form video looks like for you, how do you describe the strategy there? What is it that you're actually putting out in a sort of practical sense?
Yeah. So first and foremost, there are nuances between each social platform. So a Snapchat versus a TikTok, because of duration of length, because of what works for the algorithm. Is there any difference between a 1 minute and a 3 minute video to the user? Not that much. To the creation of that video, quite a lot. So the style doesn't always change that much. It's often talent presented stuff, focusing around, something that's topical within that respective sort of program. So, for example, if it's a TV and movie vertical, it'll be TV and movie. If it's influencer, it'll be influencer entertainment. If it's gaming, it'll be what's hot in gaming and whatnot. But, it's often sort of like playing off what is hot right now. There'll be some evergreen stuff in there as well, because obviously people are always interested to know, let's call it our opinion about things. And those kind of have much sort of more longevity or more mileage to them and whatnot. But it is largely sort of, a topical play across a number of different categories, across multiple forms of entertainment. Despite some of the nuances between social platform, if you were to look at it at first glance, they're quite similar. From a production standpoint, they're actually quite different.
A lot of listeners will be keen to hear about is, obviously gaming is a primary activity, and there are certain best practices around actually creating content for, content in and around primary activities. So from Dexerto's point of view, how do you see yourself fitting into the kind of the average, I suppose, content creation workday, if you like, the journey that people take from kind of playing a primary activity, watching esports, to actually coming to you for analysis? And how different do you think it is from more traditional legacy sports?
So definitely driving, as we've already discussed, driving the conversation. Our tone of voice has a lot more flexibility to be able to do that, right? We have to go in as appearing as a fan themselves. There's not always much benefit to Dexerto appearing as the absolute authority in the way that a legacy publisher might treat a review. Like, this is our review. This is the true, you have to live, this is a review worth investing in, right, and whatnot. And there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it plays its role, right? It guides people into finding the best game for them and ideally giving an honest review of a game and how good it is. But we're much more coming from a position of being a fan. We're on the floor. We're at the YouTube boxing matches. We're at the gaming events. We're at the esports events and whatnot. And having that tone of voice that really sort of is side by side with a fan, that brushes shoulders with a fan, is, let's call it keeps it a lot more conversational and encourages the fans to leave a conversation past a certain point versus relying on us to be constantly driving it from the top.
See, that I think is fascinating, because that almost flies in the face of what we've seen a lot of legacy publications try to do, is to appear as that kind of very authoritative source, almost a definitive, the definitive view on something. Whereas you're talking about this about almost community building in a way and being part of that conversation.
I think it's important. I am a gamer too. You're a gamer too, and I'm not sure. For me, I still like. I'm still a long form reader. In sport and in gaming, And I like reading authoritative journalism, but I'm not so sure, but not just based on data, but anecdotally too, that fans are always going to take to, let's call it their favorite journalist anymore. The power of a conversation and the opinion is going back into the community and the heroes and icons, not necessarily the reviewers and let's call it the writers and whatnot. I think there's a happy balance, a happy medium, right? And you've got to show that you understand the vernacular, you understand the sense of humor. You're not going to be late to something because you're too worried about keep making it prim and proper and buttoned up, so that in order to sort of not come across in a negative way for your brand, you've got to pull it off, and you've got to be fast, you've got to be agile. And if you're slow, you're losing the game. And if the only way to be slow is if you don't really get it and get what the community wants. So we'd like to think that we get it. There's a lot that goes on, there's a lot to keep up with and whatnot, but what reflects the fact that we get it is that we're fast and we get it right first time, and arguably that's why, it works commercially as well, brands come to us and say, listen, you get it. How do we get it right first time? So we're not coming 6 months late to some big moment that's happened and we're clearly out of touch as a result,
Which, we've seen far too much of, I think, not just within the gaming space, but more generally. How do you balance that need to, speak authoritatively and as part of the community with, I suppose, audience acquisition? Because there are going to be very few people out there. And I can almost guarantee that almost nobody listening to this, for instance, will know what Korean backdashing is in Tekken, or kind of what wave dashing is if you're looking at Melee. So how do you actually go about making sure that we're talking about that in an authoritative way that doesn't actually necessarily put off new audiences?
Interesting question. I think there are ways, before you even come to publishing content, by showing that you are, let's call it, you have a direct relationship with influencers. You are speaking with them online. You have let's call it, a level of banter with them. We use it within our own programming, not just commercial, but organic content as well. And I guess there is a bit of osmosis there in the fact that, if influencers are working with us, appearing on our content, in some cases driving our content and whatnot, that in itself has authority and status and credibility. It's his own form of authority without having to, go by the traditional definition of authority, which is often like, it's my opinion of it, our opinion is the only opinion sort of thing and whatnot, right? There are different ways of sort of developing that equivalent synonymous status with authority.
I love that description of it being its own type of authority. I think that's spot on. You mentioned when we were talking about short form video before, you touched upon monetization. Where do you see there being opportunities for more monetization around what you're doing? And so what are your current plans to, I suppose, build that revenue and make sure that you are, actually growing?
Absolutely. The eternal question, for businesses and, especially relatively new ones like ours. And I think it's about seeing what the opportunity of doing something that is high in quality but low in cost can lead you to. Short form content can become so much more. Arguably with us, it starts with editorial article, that is, so editorial written content that can then become a short form program that can then become something a little bit more longer form, or even on site, where we take one of our channels and we do a podcast, or we go to a YouTube boxing match and we create a coverage program around it. And then before you know it, it becomes a long form video series that is on the ground, live at venues and whatnot. So you can really see where something can go, because when you have those fans, the fans want to see that become multimedia. They want to see it take shape in what is probably logically progressive ways to see that kind of content develop, in the same way that a humble YouTuber can go on to become a music artist one day. You know what I mean? There's a natural logical
aspirational, yeah.
Well, yeah, there's logical push to everything. The multimedia aspects and tapping into monetization is, probably the let's call it the clinical answer to that, right? Looking where you can sort of take this content elsewhere and use those inbuilt tools on those platforms to monetize. Of course, bring your own efforts, your own direct sales efforts as well, to add further premium to those content. But there's a lot of sort of self-serve monetization out there that makes it, for all businesses, a very, much simpler, much more cost-effective start before you start thinking about direct brand deals, which we do a lot of now with this content, which is great, because it means that we can take it to levels in partnership with brands that you can't necessarily do with just self-serve monetization.
Absolutely. And in terms of kind of the brands that you're talking to, I know a couple of years ago when I was looking into this, there were a lot of more mainstream brands who were finally deciding to get into it. Gillette was all over esports for a while. Where are you seeing sort of growth in terms of brand interest in appealing to this and into your audience?
They definitely still see gaming as everything. And, things like esports, they'd have to have, let's call it a pre-existing connection or an obvious sort of connection between what we're doing in something like sport that can easily translate over to esport. But by and large, brands, agencies, they're seeing it as gaming. So, occasionally there are opportunities to sort of sell in and talk about the dream of esports and, let's call it other more sort of, niches within gaming as a whole. But by and large, it's the gaming aspect. It's being experts within gaming. And as I said earlier, helping them get it right first, whether it's coming into a Call of Duty tournament, a League of Legends tournament, whether it's coming to a YouTube boxing match, whether it's doing an activation around an influencer who's hot right now, right? Just make sure that the audience, there are differences between these audiences for all those 4 or 5 things I mentioned. Make sure we know that the audience is different for those 4 or 5 things. Yes, everyone's a gamer, but as you get further and further into their communities, things change. Humors change. You get one little thing wrong and you show that you're not in that conversation and you don't belong there. Ostracize is a hard word and whatnot, but you kind of do, so
yeah,
people are protective about their passions in gaming,
It's really interesting because I've spoken to a number of brands who are sort of looking to invest in esports and gaming. EE obviously just signed it renewed its deal with Gfinity. Obviously, there's a sort of link there between connectivity and what is required to do esports.
No, I was going to say, certainly over the past, few months, we did some really cool stuff with a couple of Kellogg's brands and a couple of General Mills brands. And look, it straddled from gaming to entertainment, just to streamer entertainment, right? Influencer entertainment to streamer entertainment. And as I said, they just wanted to make sure ultimately that, that the audience that we're hitting, the creatives, the approach, they were all spot on with what the community were expecting, so that it was adding value to that consumer experience around a piece of content. And the content didn't just feel that it was pushed out purely because dollars were being spent, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, 100%. In fact, from a journalist point of view, I was always like, what? To what extent is it true that gamers are more protectionist than everyone else? And then I remember a couple of times I've seen brands try to horn in on one of my own gaming interests, and I've gone, get out of here. From looking to kind of taking a step back and looking at kind of the wider media landscape, where do you think there are opportunities to grow? Not in terms of esports and gaming specifically, but as a digital publication, because obviously we've seen a lot of people go into, audio sponsorship, events. Obviously, it's slightly different for you guys, but where do you see there being opportunities more widely for digital publications?
Yeah, again, another eternal question. I think making your content multimedia, if you're starting off in written content, think about how many ways you can develop that content. It's never going to be, starting with an article, how it looks as an article. It's going to have its own sort of, peculiarities and differences when it comes to video, when it comes to sound and whatnot, when it comes to experiential. But, start off with the origin point, the beginning of whatever it is that you have, your concept, your vertical, your audience, and see how you can take it on a multimedia level, as I already mentioned, and I would say that, you've seen legacy media, you do a lot of, let's call it experiential event stuff because they have, I guess, authority in celebrity world, in music, in fashion. And it allows them to then sort of take that into the real world and host moments that people can go and attend to. You see a lot of influencers, right, where they're starting up their own, restaurants, outlets, their own fashion brands, their own sort of, let's call it meetups and greetups in huge stadiums and whatnot. So there's a number of sort of different ways that influencers are doing things that publishers already did, but obviously they're taking that a little bit in-house and whatnot, if you know what I mean, right? So, yeah, I would say just start off thinking about where you can make your whatever content you have at the beginning and make it as multimedia as possible.
Nice. Fantastic. Well, Josh, thank you so much for that. As a final question, we ask all the guests who appear on Media Voices to recommend a piece of media that you've enjoyed recently. That could be a game, that could be, that could be a book, podcast, anything. It doesn't have to be gaming or esports related. Just something that you'd really recommend to the audience for either the insight or the enjoyment it's given you.
You asked me at a good time because I would love to be engaging and consuming much more content and entertainment and gaming right now. But actually, I just came off the back of God of War 2018 one, the original, because the Ragnarok hype totally, it got me. And I thought I can't just dive into it because I quickly discovered that this was always intended to be two-part sort of series within the God of War franchise. It was old school sort of, just sitting there till 3 a.m. and some evenings, some nights, completing the game, doing all the little bits, breaking all the barrels, smashing all the chests, and knowing that I'm wasting my time, but wanting subconsciously to draw the game out because I was enjoying it that much, Yeah. At no point did I get fatigue. If anything, I welcomed the idea of being on autopilot for multiple hours and having achieved very little in the game, as a matter of fact. So I absolutely loved it, and I've just started Ragnarok as well. So
absolutely. You know what? Time you enjoyed wasting isn't wasted time.
Right.
And if this was a video podcast, I would just drop footage of that first fight against the stranger where, you trash, trash the house. I would include that just to really sell it. But Josh, thank you so much for that. It's been really, really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, appreciate it.
So there's lots going on with us as we start the new year. We're still sorting through our Publisher Podcast Awards entries now. Hopefully the shortlist for that will be out very soon. And we're also getting to grips with our new email newsletter system. Thank you very much, Elon Musk. But no, we're loving being on Beehive. You can subscribe to get the top 4 media stories in your inbox each day by going to voices.media. There's lots of sign-up boxes on the website, or we publish each day's edition on the website now, so you can click on the newsletter tab and see it there. So all of the little snarky things we've referenced this week, get those in your inbox first.
Nice one.
And while you're signing up, you can also check out our Ko-Fi page and our back catalogue of episodes. They're both available through links on voices.media. Huge stock. This is our 243rd episode. So there is a huge stock of episodes on there if you want to go back and unpack a time capsule of media analysis from anywhere in the past 4 to 5 years, which is terrifying.
A time capsule. I love that idea. We should do time capsule merch as well.
So we're selling underwear and time capsules.
Time capsules, yeah.
Very nice.
Oh, that'd be cool. You could put a random story from the last 5 years on like a fortune cookie, but rolled up in a little screwed up like test tube thing, and people would like randomly get.
Or you could wrap it up in a pair of pants and then put it in a test tube.
Yeah, because even if it's not a really good story, at least you've got a pair of pants.
And now, dear listener, you understand why we have no merchandise at the moment.
Well, until next week when we'll come back with another fantastic business idea like that. Thank you so much for listening, and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.